caught my wife cheating at her summer writing workshop. I hired a private investigator, gathered all the evidence I needed, and vanished without a trace before she even made it back home. The name is Daniel Carter, but everyone calls me Dan. Never Danny. There is always some loud, clueless guy who gets too familiar and tries calling me Danny. So, Danny, what do you do for work? They ask. I usually say, I designed this nifty little device cops use from 40 feet away to spot drunk drivers. They even attach them to radar guns now. That usually shuts them up. But if you were wondering, no, that gadget does not exist. It is just my way of weeding out nonsense. I have a pretty low tolerance for foolishness. Lie to me, and you are only making it worse. I keep things simple. I like a straightforward life and find plenty of satisfaction in my work. I am an engineer for a large national firm with offices all over the country. I have friends, and while I am not much of a drinker, I will have a beer here and there. Honestly, I am more of a nachos guy, but that is my struggle. If I overdo it, the weight creeps on, so I try to stay in decent shape for my age. I used to sail whenever I had the chance, but family life changed that. Between my wife and raising 2 daughters, there was not much time left for hobbies. Eventually, I sold the boat. It was one of those compromises I made happily, so I could spend quality time with the people who matter most. I have been married to Laura for 25 years. She is a high school teacher, and our 2 daughters are now in college. Our oldest, Emily, is studying at Brown University in Rhode Island, and her younger sister, Sarah, is attending Boston University. We are lucky. I could not have paid for those schools on my salary, but both girls are bright and hardworking. They earned impressive scholarships. We live in North Carolina, in the Research Triangle area. It is a great place to live, surrounded by top universities and high-tech companies. The quality of life here is unbeatable. I could go on about Carolina barbecue, but I would just make myself hungry. When the girls chose schools up north, I felt a bit disappointed. I wanted them close, but I knew they needed to explore beyond home. I am proud of them. They are amazing, smart, funny, and full of good values. I worry about them constantly, but I trust their judgment. Watching them grow into independent young women meant Laura and I could finally have time for just us again. I've been looking forward to this stage. With both girls off at college, I imagine Laura and me rekindling our connection. Dinners out, catching a play or movie, rediscovering each other like when we were newlyweds. I pictured a life filled with happiness, just the 2 of us again. But reality was not quite what I imagined. During that first year as empty nesters, I noticed Laura changing. Her interests were shifting. At first, I thought it was just her finding herself now that the girls were gone, but over time, it became clear it was something more. Laura is an English teacher, specializing in creative writing, but she is also a frustrated writer. Being a young mom and a teacher left her with little time to pursue writing as she wanted. She would squeeze in an hour here or there during the summer to work on essays and short stories, but nothing really came of it. She sent pieces to literary magazines only to collect rejection letters. That masterpiece she dreamed of never materialized. I will admit, I like her writing. She is good, but her stories tend to follow a formula and get a little too dramatic. I think she is more in love with the idea of being a writer than the writing itself. Still, if it made her happy, it made me happy too. Throughout our marriage, Laura has been part of various writing groups. These groups meet to critique, suggest, and discuss each other's work. Some groups seemed productive, while others just felt like social clubs. Her latest group, well, it had a bit of both. They rotated meetings at each other's homes. When it was at our house, I tried to give them space. I even joined in once, but Laura and a few others seemed less than thrilled, so I stayed out of it after that. The group had about 10 members, a mix of men and women. Some are all right, but a few rubbed me the wrong way. There was Reggie, who focused on history and biographies. She did real research and wrote compelling, scholarly books. I read all of them and liked her work. Then there was Betty, who dabbled in fantasy. Her stuff was lighthearted, more about talking unicorns than epic battles. She wrote for fun, and you could not fault her for that. Then there was Sam. The first time I met him, alarm bells went off in my head, and they have not stopped ringing since. It felt like I was being introduced to him, not the other way around. He looked me up and down and asked, "So, Danny, what do you do for a living?" Laura gave me a subtle frown and a shake of her head, so I just said, "I am an engineer." Sam smirked. It was not a friendly smile. After that, I gave up trying to interact with the group. Instead, I would keep out of sight but not out of earshot. Sometimes I worked in the next room or sat on the back porch with the window open. I started noticing things between Sam and Laura. They seemed to have inside jokes and a connection that did not sit right with me. He would boost her ego one moment and act like he knew her better than I did the next. There was always something about Sam that got under my skin, and the dynamic between him and Laura made me uneasy. I got the distinct impression that some of their interactions flew under the radar for the rest of the group. It was subtle, but it left me with a bad feeling. I brought it up to Laura once, but she brushed it off, telling me I was reading too much into things. I decided not to push it, but I made sure she knew exactly how I felt. After that, it was her choice to handle it as she saw fit. The group had a regular rhythm during their meetings. They would critique each other's work, and afterward, they would unwind with wine and casual conversation. It was during these moments I started noticing cracks in some of their facades, moments where the group's true nature seemed to peek through. One evening in early March, during a meeting at our house, the discussion shifted to the lifestyles of famous writers. Someone said, "Oh, all the great writers were alcoholics, right? They would write in the morning and drink the rest of the day. It freed their minds, made them more creative." Another chimed in, "And do not forget, they all had those fiery romantic relationships. That is what really fueled their inspiration." Then Sam piped up, waxing poetic about how the thrill of secrecy and the excitement of hidden passions were what made great art. "The real magic," he said, "comes from the intensity and the thrill of keeping something just between the two of you." Laura's response stopped me cold. "Absolutely. It is the thrill of the unknown," she said. "The excitement of keeping it hidden from everyone else. That is where true inspiration lives." Some in the group chuckled, but the tone felt too serious for my liking. I tried to convince myself it was just a joke, but from that moment on, I could not help but listen more closely to their conversations. Later, Bill, another group member, joked, "Maybe we all need a wild night of passion so we can each write the next great American novel." He laughed, but I could not tell if he was serious or not. Betty, ever the optimist, tried steering the conversation back on track. "Exceptional stories do not come from character flaws," she said. "They come from humanity, empathy, and confronting the mysteries of life." I liked Betty's perspective. It was one of the reasons I respected her. But Sam was quick to derail things again, muttering some sarcastic comment about conjuring the right enchantment to avoid all the hard work. To my frustration, some of the group actually found his quip amusing. As the evening went on, the topic of writing workshops came up. Sam asked if anyone else was applying to the Illinois Writer Workshop that summer. "I already sent in my application," Laura said. "Fingers crossed they accept me." 6 weeks of writing and discussing ideas with other writers. It could be life-changing. That was the first I had heard about it. Sam jumped in immediately, telling her, "You will definitely get in. Your writing has improved so much over the past year." Then he casually added, "I applied too, though I am not as confident as you are about getting accepted." My gut was telling me something was off. Sam was not the type to be modest about anything, and I did not like where the conversation was heading. Still, I trusted Laura completely. When you have been married as long as we had, trust becomes a foundation, a way of life. You do not question it. You believe your partner has your back, no matter what. But trust only works when it is mutual. And eventually, cracks start to show. I pushed that evening's conversation out of my mind as best I could. After all, we had been married for over 2 decades. Trust was not just a choice. It was something you lived. But a few weeks later, something happened that made me pause. It was late April, and I had been out in the yard finishing up some gardening. I decided to call it a day and head inside. As I reached the kitchen door, I heard Laura on the phone. "I cannot wait," she said, her voice animated. 6 whole weeks with no responsibilities, no commitments, and no one waiting for me to come back. I froze. Those words stopped me in my tracks. "It is going to be the most self-indulgent 6 weeks of my life," she added, laughing. "I owe it to myself. And so do you." I stood there, trying to process what I was hearing. None of it sat right with me. Finally, I pushed open the door and walked in. Laura looked startled, like she had been caught off guard. "Well, I have to go. Dan just walked in, and I need to start dinner," she said, quickly hanging up. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Oh, just Reggie," she said casually. "We were talking about school wrapping up soon." I did not believe her. Something felt off, but I decided to let it go for the moment. Later that evening, as we sat down for dinner, the other shoe dropped. "Dan, you will not believe the news," she said, smiling. "I got accepted to the Illinois Writer Workshop." I forced a smile and nodded. "That is great," I said, though my stomach churned. I tried to play it cool when Laura told me about the writer's workshop. "Maybe I can take some time off work and come with you," I said casually. "I would love to hear those writer talks." Her reaction caught me off guard. She looked surprised. "Oh, well, we could consider it," she replied, though her tone was hesitant. "It is going to be an intense 6 weeks, and I might not have much free time to spend with you." Something about her answer sent a twinge of doubt through me. My instincts were buzzing. "You know me," I said with a grin. "I'm not demanding. I could even be the coffee guy for the group." She forced a smile, the kind that did not quite reach her eyes. "That could be nice, dear. Let us see how things go." I had been deflected like that before, and I knew what it meant. She had no intention of letting me tag along. "I get the feeling you would rather I did not come," I said, watching her closely. "Oh, no, not at all," she insisted. "I just think you might find it boring. You are into computers and circuits. This is more about writers discussing big, abstract ideas." It stung more than I let on. In my head, I was shouting, "I am not unintelligent, Laura." But I kept my voice steady. "I see," I said. Her smile softened, but I could tell I had been firmly sidelined. "You would not enjoy it," she added gently. "It is just not your kind of thing." Later that night, after Laura went to bed, I logged onto our AT&T account. I needed answers. The phone records listed every call and text, and it did not take me long to confirm what I suspected. The call I interrupted earlier was not from Reggie. It had come from Sam's number. Trust, it is such a fragile thing. After 25 years of marriage, I never thought I would find myself questioning Laura's honesty. But there I was, staring at proof that she had lied to me. In the weeks that followed, Laura seemed consumed by talk of the workshop. I brought up the idea of visiting her in Illinois or going with her again, but each time, she shut it down. Then her approach shifted from rationalizing to sweetening the deal. "Dan, I have the best news," she announced one evening, her eyes lighting up. "I got you and Mark II tickets to a fishing camp in northern Canada in late June. You can spend a whole week fishing for those big browns you are always talking about. It was expensive, but I wanted to thank you for being so understanding about the workshop. It sounded too good to be true. My gut told me it was part of a bigger plan." "That is thoughtful of you," I said carefully. "But honestly, I would rather spend time with you." Laura's expression tightened. "Dan, we have been through this. It just does not make sense for you to come with me. I will be busy the entire time, and I would feel bad neglecting you." I studied her face, looking for cracks in her calm demeanor. Was that condescension I saw? Or guilt? "Canada sounds fun," I said finally, though my tone betrayed my doubt. Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp with irritation. "At least say it with some enthusiasm. Those tickets were expensive, and I want you to enjoy yourself." I nodded, plastering on a fake smile. "Sure, sounds fun." But in my mind, I was already forming a plan. A surprise trip to Illinois was starting to feel like the best option. That night, I retreated to the basement to work on some projects and clear my head. The house is old, with one of those floor grates in the hallway to let heat rise from the furnace room below. Over time, I had learned to ignore it, but that night it became my unwitting ally. As I tinkered, I heard Laura's voice drift down through the grate. She was on the phone again. "Yes, I gave him the tickets," she said, her voice low and hurried. "He is still hesitant, but I keep telling him he will not enjoy it. No, I cannot just tell him not to come. I understand, and I want that too, but I also want to stay married afterward. I just need him to give me some space to enjoy myself for a few weeks. I deserve it. I have earned it." There was a pause, and her voice softened. "Yes, I want those weeks with you too. All right, let's wait a bit. I think it will come around." "Okay, baby. I miss you too." Write something amazing for me tonight. The call ended, but her words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. I sat in silence, my mind racing. I'm not a fool. I knew what I had heard. Laura was either having an affair or on the brink of one. Either way, there was no denying the betrayal. It took me 20 minutes to gather myself. My chest felt tight, and my thoughts were scattered. But one thing was clear. I could not let her know I was onto her. Not yet. I called upstairs, my voice calm and affectionate. Laura, I am heading over to Mark's to share the good news about the fishing trip. That is great, dear. Enjoy yourself, she replied, her tone bright and unbothered. I slipped out the basement door, desperate for fresh air and space to think. Mark had been my best friend since childhood, and I needed someone to talk to. When I told him what had been going on, his reaction was immediate. You have got to be kidding me, he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. Laura? No way. She would never do that to you, Dan. I am telling you, Mark, I said, shaking my head. She is working hard to keep me away from that workshop. She is calling someone baby, and it is definitely not me. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of my words settling between us. Sometimes, all a guy needs is someone to sit with him in his pain. You need to talk to her, Mark said finally. You cannot go through the next few months like this without getting to the truth. And what is she going to say? I shot back. How much do you want to bet that when I check the phone records tonight, it is not Sam she is calling baby? It is not Sam she is planning all this with. Mark sighed, his face grim. I am not taking that bet. Exactly, I said. I will talk to her, but I am not rushing into it. After 25 years together, I owe it to myself to handle this right. I told Jake my plan bluntly. I'm going to ask Laura outright why she does not want me there. Do you think she will be honest with me? Jake shook his head. No. Yeah, me neither, I admitted. But I am still going to tell her the truth, about how much I love her, how much it would hurt me if she were unfaithful, and how it would end everything between us. I expect she will try to convince me I am imagining things, or worse, tell me to just go on that fishing trip and stop worrying. Jake paused, then smirked. By the way, you still have that extra ticket to Canada, right? I laughed, grateful for his humor. You're always welcome, buddy. We talked for hours that night, venting our thoughts over a few beers. By the time I headed home, I felt steadier, though my doubts still lingered. After dinner, I asked Laura to join me in the living room. It was time to address everything that had been bothering me. Well, almost everything. I held a few cards close to my chest. Laura, I have some concerns, I began, trying to stay calm. I do not feel like you have been completely honest with me about this writer's workshop. She frowned, her eyes narrowing slightly. What do you mean? I overheard you talking about it with your group back in March. I continued, but you did not mention it to me until you had already made plans. And then there was that conversation about how great writers often have affairs. That did not sit well with me. Plus, you have been talking to Sam about the trip, but when I ask, you tell me it was someone else. Her expression turned defensive. Done? Let me finish, I said gently. When you told me you got accepted, you seemed distant, like you were discouraging me from being a part of it. Instead of discussing it with me, you made other plans for me to be somewhere else. It feels like you were trying to keep me away, and it makes me wonder, have you been completely honest with me? Have you been faithful to me? Laura's face flushed. Dan, how could you even ask me that? I would never cheat on you. You are my husband, and all I want is for you to have a good time. Her voice broke slightly. It hurts that you could think that about me. I cannot help how I feel, Laura, I replied. You know I love you. I have loved you since the day we met. But I cannot ignore what I have been seeing and hearing. Is this workshop your way of escaping from our marriage? Her face hardened, and whatever tenderness was left in her voice evaporated. She exploded into shouting, hurling accusations at me for not trusting her. The rest of the night was a mess of yelling and icy silence. For the next week, the silent treatment became her weapon of choice. She used it to push me into backing down, to make me feel guilty for doubting her. But I refused to fold. If anything, her behavior only strengthened my resolve. Eventually, I gave her the impression she had won. If she was going to cheat, I could not stop her. The phone call I overheard suggested she might already have. I thanked her for the fishing trip, though my mood stayed dark. She seemed content once she thought she had me placated, flipping a switch back to the loving wife. But it felt calculated manipulation, plain and simple. The Illinois Writers' Workshop was about 500 miles away, held on a state university campus. I needed someone on the ground, so I followed a co-worker's advice and hired a private investigator based in Illinois. The campus layout made it easier for surveillance. Participants stayed in dorms, ate at cafeterias, and mingled in local bars. Some students working undercover for the investigator blended in seamlessly, equipped with advanced recording devices. Back home, I tried to play the devoted husband. I cooked dinners, took Laura to shows, and spent time with her. She seemed to enjoy everything, but whenever I told her I loved her, I got the same dismissive "I know" response. Over time, it became clear she did not stop loving me. She had started taking me for granted. To her, I was the safety net, reliable, familiar, always there. She thought she could seek out excitement, take a break from our marriage, and come back to find me waiting. The day she left, I could not let her go without saying something. As we stood by the door, her shuttle waiting outside, I hugged her tightly. "Laura," I whispered, "please do not do anything that could ruin us." She pulled back, irritated. "I am so tired of you not trusting me, Dan. When I get back, we're going to have a serious talk about this." She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her bags, and left without looking back. As the shuttle pulled away, I felt certain that my marriage of 25 years was ending. Our family, our life together, was unraveling without much of a fight. The private investigator's report was thorough. Laura and Sam did not bother hiding their actions. They were in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by strangers. She removed her wedding rings on the plane, claiming she was recently divorced. From the moment they arrived, Laura and Sam were inseparable, holding hands, sharing kisses, and acting like teenagers in love. The investigators' team went to great lengths to confirm what I already knew. They placed a small camera in the dorm hallway. Laura and Sam were assigned separate rooms, but they only used one. Some nights it was hers, other nights his. They always stayed together. The final straw came one evening when the team captured a clear video of them through a fisheye lens slipped under the door. Sam's carelessness confirmed everything. I was done. Anything else the investigator uncovered was just icing on the cake. My decision had been made. After that first week at the workshop, the path forward became crystal clear, and my decision was final. I spent the early days of Laura's time away putting my plan into motion. My goal was simple: to vanish from her life completely. When she came back, I would already be gone. No arguments, no ultimatums, no long discussions or attempts to repair what was already broken. There would be no need for explanations. The only thing waiting for her would be divorce. Love does not disappear overnight, but trust is the foundation, and once it is gone, the future crumbles with it. Some might say my approach was weak, that I should have sought revenge, humiliated her, ruined her reputation, or left her destitute. But none of that would have changed what had happened, and I was not about to ruin my own life by chasing petty vengeance. My revenge was simple. I would take away the one thing she had always counted on me: the husband who supported her, comforted her, and motivated her. I was removing myself from her world entirely. As for Sam, I was not worried about him being her long-term answer. He was no real prize, and I knew he could not provide the stability she would eventually need. Laura, a divorced woman in her 50s, would have to figure that out on her own. She was no longer my concern. The private investigator continued sending updates, photos, videos, audio recordings, evidence of Laura's betrayal that was both undeniable and deeply painful. The recordings, especially, were tough to hear. "She's clueless," Laura had laughed during one conversation. "He keeps texting me about the fish he's catching, thanking me every day for the trip. It's ridiculous." Sam joined in with his usual smirk. "Keep him in the dark. Treat him like a mushroom. Feed him garbage and keep him in the dark. You are free to enjoy yourself." They laughed at my expense, mocking my trust, my interests, and my kindness. Laura giggled at his quip, then added, "I'll deal with him when I get back. How dare he accuse me of cheating?" Sam leaned closer. But you were taking a break from your marriage, right? Or is it some other woman sharing my bed every night? Laura actually giggled. Maybe he's onto something, she said, but I won't tolerate being treated like this. I'm a writer, for heaven's sake, and he's holding me back with his circuits and computer mumbo-jumbo. Micro somethings and millimeters. He wouldn't understand big ideas if they hit him in the face. Hearing those words confirmed everything I already knew. My marriage was over. I considered many forms of revenge, but none of them offered the kind of closure I needed. As long as my life was connected to hers, I would never be free. So, I chose to start over. I explained the situation to my boss, who was incredibly understanding. He had gone through something similar not long ago. He arranged for me to transfer to our office in Portland, Maine, which was appealing for several reasons. I knew the people there, respected their work, and liked the area. It felt like the right place to begin again. I contacted a moving company and arranged for half the furniture and all my personal belongings to be sent north. My car was prepped for the long drive. Then I met with a lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings. Financially, things were straightforward. Laura had her own retirement accounts, and I removed her name from all my assets. I signed a quitclaim deed for the house, giving her full ownership in exchange for no alimony. As for our daughters, I updated my will to make them the sole beneficiaries of everything I owned. I planned to deal with joint bank accounts and credit cards quietly, closer to the end. My goal was to keep Laura completely unaware of my plans until the moment she returned. In the meantime, I tried calling her occasionally to ask about the workshop and to express my love. Hearing her lies firsthand only strengthened my resolve. She would gush about how much she missed me, then hurry off to dinner. The investigator later confirmed Sam had been right beside her, smirking and making mocking gestures. Eventually, I switched to texting her instead. It was easier to control my emotions that way. I sent her cheerful updates about the fishing trip, though it was actually Jake and his wife who went. They had a great time, and I was glad for them. As Laura's 6-week workshop neared its end, I wrapped up my own preparations. A friend who was a real estate agent gave me a for sale sign, which I placed in the front yard. Technically, I could not sell the house without Laura's consent, especially since I had already transferred ownership to her. But she did not know that yet, and I wanted the sight of that sign to rattle her when she came home. I changed the locks on the house, leaving behind only a few reminders of what I had uncovered. On the dining room table, I placed a manila envelope containing selected photos of her and Sam, explicit stills from the hallway video, and a copy of the investigator's full report. My belongings were already gone, stored safely in Portland. All I kept with me were 2 suitcases, my briefcase, my laptop, and my guitar. The guitar was non-negotiable. It was too important to entrust to movers. Initially, I planned to leave early the next morning, ensuring I was long gone before Laura got back. But the night before, I had a change of heart. I wanted her to feel the sting immediately. I emailed her 3 photos. One of her and Sam on the dance floor, her wedding and engagement rings noticeably absent. Another of them walking hand in hand into his dorm room. And a screenshot from the dorm video, her face unmistakable. I added only 3 words to the email. I divorce you. Then I turned off my phone and left the house. Walking away from what had been my family home for so many years was both painful and liberating. It felt like closing a chapter of my life, one filled with betrayal and heartache, but also with the possibility of something new. The woman I had married was gone. I did not know when or why it had happened, but the person I saw in those photos was a stranger. As I drove away, I felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by the uncertainty and freedom of a fresh start. My mind was spinning as I drove along the quiet highway, the miles ticking by as I wrestled with everything that had happened. About 100 miles later, I spotted a small, local hotel, not a big chain, but one of those places with character and the promise of a hearty breakfast. I needed something authentic, something grounding. The next morning, I found myself savoring what might be my last plate of grits for a while. There was something comforting in that meal, a reminder of home. As I ate, I started reconsidering my journey to Maine. I had a window of time before work started, 2 full weeks. Why rush? I needed to calm my thoughts, process Laura's betrayal and let go of the weight of the past. I decided to take it slow. The drive would be my way of easing into this new chapter, leaving behind the mess of my old life. I planned to soak in the scenery, stop in small towns, and meet new people along the way. This journey would be a kind of reset, a way to cleanse myself of the hurt and mistakes of the past, preparing for a fresh start. That day, I wandered around Williamsburg, taking in the crafts and artistry of skilled artisans. The crowds of tourists gave the place a lively energy, and despite not having a reservation, I found a room for the night. After a light dinner, I settled in and let my thoughts drift back to Laura. By then, she was probably home, standing in front of the house. I pictured her reaction to the for sale sign in the yard, the lock she could no longer open, and the damning evidence left on the dining room table. The next morning, I headed north, taking the back roads toward Annapolis, Maryland. The drive was beautiful, winding through historic plantations and along rivers like the York and Potomac that feed into the Chesapeake Bay. It felt like the road itself was guiding me away from betrayal and toward something new. In a quiet hotel room in downtown Annapolis, I finally powered on my cell phone. As expected, it was flooded with missed calls, texts, and emails. Most were from Laura, though a few came from friends. I forced myself to read and listen to all of them. It was painful, but necessary. Laura's early messages, sent from Illinois before she returned home, were full of excuses. She claimed things were not as they seemed, trying to downplay what I already knew. Yeah, right. My friends, meanwhile, told me Laura had been calling everyone she could think of, trying to find me. Little did she know, she was searching in all the wrong places. Only Jake and his wife knew where I was, and I kept it that way intentionally. I planned to reach out to others once I was settled. 2 messages worried me the most. Both were from my daughters. Laura had reached out to them, trying to figure out where I was. I had deliberately avoided telling them about my decision to leave their mother. I wanted to do it face to face, but I could not let them worry. When I called Claire and Sophia, I calmly explained what had happened. They were shocked, struggling to believe their mom was capable of such betrayal. To make it clear, I sent them the same photos and investigator's report I had left for Laura. Claire was furious. I cannot believe this. Is she even the same person who raised us? What kind of disgusting person has she turned into? Claire, I interrupted gently. She's still your mother, no matter what she's done. Remember, it's me she betrayed, not you. Sorry, Dad, she said, her voice shaking. But she shattered our family. This absolutely affects me. I could not argue with that. After our conversation, Claire promised not to tell Laura about my plans. Sophia said the same. I knew it was hard for them, but I needed their support, and they understood that. Later, my lawyer called with an update. Laura had been served with divorce papers. He also informed me that Sam's wife had received the full package of photos, videos, and audio recordings. Karma had come for Sam. By the 3rd day of my trip, I was driving through northern Maryland and felt a rush of excitement as I crossed into New Jersey. I did not stop, though, until I reached Connecticut. Once there, I spent hours exploring historic coastal towns. The architecture was so different from what I was used to in North Carolina. It was a tangible reminder that I was in a new place, both physically and emotionally. At one point, I found myself near a naval base, watching for submarines. I knew they were stealthy, but I still tried to spot one. I chuckled, thinking about how they cut a hole in the hull to refuel a nuclear reactor, then weld it back together. It struck me as a metaphor. Maybe Laura's betrayal, which tore a hole in my heart, was the first step in rebuilding my life. The next morning, I braced myself for what I knew would be the hardest part of the journey, seeing Claire at Brown University. The drive to Rhode Island was quick, and I arrived at her dorm late in the morning. Claire greeted me with a strained smile, trying to mask her emotions. To give her some time, we spent an hour touring the campus, pretending everything was normal. She introduced me to her friends in the cafeteria, a group of kind, supportive young people. On the way out, I pulled Claire's roommate aside. "She's having a tough time," I said quietly. "Please keep an eye on her." "Of course, Mr. Carter," she replied. "She told us everything last night. We're here for her." Claire had chosen her friends well. Later, in her dorm room, We had a long, emotional conversation. I showed her photos and played recordings I never thought I would share with one of my children. Her emotions swung between sadness and anger. "I can't believe Mom did this," she said, tears in her eyes. "How could she destroy our family?" "She betrayed me, Claire, not you," I reminded her. "But it affects me too," she insisted. She broke everything. We talked for hours, and by evening, I suggested she invite her friends out for dinner. I took them to the best place I could afford. Over the meal, I shared funny stories about my own college dining experiences, which seemed to lift their spirits. That night, I stayed in a nearby hotel, and the next morning, I had breakfast with Claire. Before I left, I hugged her tightly. After a tearful hug, I left Claire in Providence and headed north to Boston to see Sophia. Claire must have warned her, because Sophia was much calmer than her older sister. There was still disappointment and anger, but less shock. She asked to see the evidence, so I showed her everything. While we were talking, Laura called. Sophia glanced at her phone, then looked at me. I shook my head, waving my hands and making a throat-cutting gesture to signal, "Don't answer." She nodded and sent the call to voicemail. Sophia, the level-headed one in the family, took it all in stride. Then she did something I never expected. "Dad called me last night, didn't he?" she said into the phone. Her voice was calm but cutting. "Is it true you've become someone who cheats on her husband and lies about it? Multiple partners, Mom? Really?" I froze. Part of me wanted to scold her for being so direct with her mother, but I could not deny the truth behind her words. "You heard me, Mom. You spent 6 weeks with another man while Dad was home alone. Was it worth it? Was it worth throwing away your marriage?" I was floored. Note to self: never get on Sophia's bad side. She hung up, shaking her head. "She just cried and made excuses, but I'm not buying it," Sophia said matter-of-factly. Later, I took Sophia and her friends to a Thai restaurant near campus called the Elephant Walk. Like her sister, Sophia had chosen her friends well. Dinner was a pleasant mix of conversation and laughter. On the way back to campus, one of her friends piped up. "Mr. Carter, Sophia told us what you're going through," she said. "She was upset last night, but we're here for her. Maybe next time you visit, we'll treat you to the cafeteria." That sparked a round of laughter. "Or maybe somewhere better than that," another friend joked. We laughed all the way back to her dorm. I stayed the night in a nearby hotel and had breakfast with Sophia the next morning before continuing my journey. As I drove north, I could not help but feel a surge of pride for my daughters. They were strong, principled young women, and I was confident they would navigate the challenges of the divorce better than I had feared. Still, saying goodbye to them was tough. I did not know when I would see them again, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. Instead of heading straight to Portland, I veered off course when I reached Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Something about the looming White Mountains called to me. I drove west toward the Presidential Range, eventually boarding the Cog Railway to the summit of Mount Washington. Standing there, the cold Arctic winds whipping around me, I looked out over the smaller peaks and the dense green pine forests below. For the first time, I felt a sense of rebirth. I was alone, but I was standing tall. Laura's betrayal had torn a hole in my life, but here on this mountain, I felt ready to rebuild. This was my fresh start, a chance to leave behind the regrets of the past and embrace the unknown future. The next morning, I treated myself to pancakes drenched in real maple syrup. I was in maple syrup country now, and I planned to savor every bite. Feeling rested and recharged, I continued on to Portland. I arrived in the mid-afternoon and decided to check in with my new boss, Henry. The office staff gave me a warm welcome. Many of them were familiar faces, and seeing them felt reassuring after the whirlwind of the past week. Henry even organized an impromptu dinner. Instead of a downtown restaurant, we ended up at his house grilling steaks, sipping on excellent local beer, and sharing stories. I could have gone for lobster, but there was no rush. This night was about reconnecting with people and grounding myself. Over dinner, they asked about my story. What brought a guy from the South all the way to Maine? I kept the details vague, but gave them enough to understand. I might be a bit short-tempered in the coming weeks, I admitted. It's not like me, but I have a lot to process. If I act out, just call me on it, okay? I could use a little pushback now and then. Unexpectedly, The women in the group all gave me quick hugs and kisses on the cheek, while the men put an arm around my shoulder. "We're here for you, Dan," they said. That night, back at my hotel, I powered up my phone again. Both of my daughters had sent supportive texts, and their friends had even reached out, thanking me for dinner and assuring me they would look out for Claire and Sophia. Those kids were remarkable, mature, and kind. Friends from back home had left messages too, wondering why I had vanished. I decided it was time to call them back. Without revealing my location, I explained why I had left. Most were skeptical at first, so I sent them the same 3 photos I had sent Laura, along with the same assurance. There was more evidence if they needed it. I had tried to shield Laura from her own choices, but that had failed. The truth needed to come out. One by one, my friends expressed their support. It became clear that my idea of becoming a ghost was wishful thinking. Too many people cared about me, and I was grateful for that. Eventually, I turned to Laura's messages. She had confessed, but her apologies were tangled with bursts of anger. Somehow, she still managed to blame me for her actions for the fallout for everything. It was ridiculous. I sent her a text, saying I would call her the next day around noon. It was a conversation that had to happen, no matter how much I dreaded it. Laura's excuses were as predictable as they were absurd. She blamed me, claiming it was all my fault because I worked too much. Then, with a straight face, she had the nerve to insist that nothing serious happened with Sam, that they were just messing around. I almost laughed out loud when she tried to spin it as a search for creative inspiration. She even accused me of turning our daughters against her, as if her own actions had not done that all by themselves. When she finally ran out of words, I kept it simple. I laid it all out. You conspired with Sam to betray me. You resisted every effort I made to save our relationship. You carried out the betrayal, and now you are facing the consequences. I am done, Laura. There is no going back. She kept crying and pleading, but I had nothing left to say. I hung up, knowing I was finished with her. I knew too much, and there was no room for doubt or forgiveness. After moving to Portland, I found a simple 2-bedroom apartment in an older building near my office. It was cozy and close enough that I could walk to work. At first, I saw it as a temporary solution, but my perspective shifted quickly. Living simply in town, without the hassle of maintaining a house, had its perks. Then I thought, why stop there? Instead of buying a cottage for weekends, why not get a boat? Something docked in the harbor could be my seaside retreat, a place to escape and breathe. By early fall, I had the plan mapped out. Surprisingly, my life here has not been as solitary as I expected. I see my daughters more often now than I did back in Raleigh. They visit every month, often bringing their friends along. For 36 hours, my little apartment bursts with life, laughter, and activity. I always treat them to dinner before they head back. Once they leave, I enjoy the quiet, though I miss them as soon as they are gone. Some of my friends from North Carolina have even made the trip to see me, with more planning visits when the weather warms up. I live alone, but I am far from lonely. I have made new friends at work and through my adventures in the sailing community. It is a welcoming and lively group, full of interesting people. I have even met some intriguing women, but I am keeping things respectful until the divorce is finalized. Even now, Laura still reaches out from time to time. She has not shown true remorse, just a habit of downplaying everything. Everyone does it, she says. It does not mean anything, but it does. Intimacy carries weight. The lies and manipulation, those matter even more. I thought about explaining this to her, but I decided it was not worth the effort. People change, and I no longer see the point in trying to convince her of what she refuses to admit. Our lives are not entirely separate. 2 daughters and a circle of mutual friends make a clean break impossible. But with 600 miles between us, I no longer live under the daily shadow of rejection and betrayal. Laura was once the center of my world, but now I am building my own life. As for positives, there are plenty. I genuinely enjoy living here in Maine. My first winter was a shock, but if others can handle it, so can I. The early darkness makes indoor gatherings feel cozier, and I have found a new rhythm to my days. I'm already searching for a boat and found a spot with moorings not far from town. Spring cannot come soon enough. I am eager to start splicing lines and varnishing wood. The local restaurants are excellent, The microbreweries are top-notch, and the people are refreshingly genuine. I have even discovered new hobbies like contra dancing, and there always seems to be another surprise waiting around the corner. Is my heart fully healed? Not yet, but time has a way of mending wounds, and I feel confident about the life ahead. Oh, and as a side note, Sam's wife turned out to be as old-fashioned as I am. She kicked him out, filed for divorce, and made sure he got what he deserved. As for Sam and Laura novels, neither of them has been published. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done differently if you were in Laura's or her husband's shoes? If you like the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.